Wait for Good morning and welcome. I'm Gita Pensay and I'm going to be your host today, guiding you through this event, which I know is going to be insightful and thought-provoking. It's great to have so many of you back and also to see some new faces who are joining us for the very first time. So welcome to you all. Our event today, as I'm sure you know, is Public Sector Cyber Security, which is being delivered to you by Public Sector Executive. The cybersecurity event will be packed full of opportunities to network and acquire current sector knowledge, whether this knowledge is gained from our speakers or also from event partners in the digital marketplace. I can guarantee you there will be lots of opportunity today to learn and also engage with each other. We'd like to take this opportunity to thank our industry leaders and our experts for joining us today to share your invaluable knowledge and insights. The content standard that will be shared on our PSE365 platform means that all the content is CPD certified, and for every hour of content that you watch live, you'll earn 1 CPD point. To get your certificate, please email the PSE team, that's at marketing@cognitivepublishing.com. That's marketing@cognitivepublishing.com, and they will sort that all out for you. Now, in addition to CPD today, you can give back, feel great, and also engage in some healthy competition. So whilst learning today, our gamification tools will be active. So you can score points by engaging with the platform's different elements. If you've not experienced this before, I'll give you some examples. So if you join a live session today, there's 50 points that will be earned. Make a connection with another delegate in the platform, that earns you 100 points. Or ask a question in a session or engage with one of our exhibitors in the digital marketplace and you earn another 50. So you get sort of the gist of this. The more that you engage and interact, the more points that you will earn. And I'm sure you're thinking, why do I want to do this? Well, at the end of the event, those who finish in first, second and third places respectively will have 250, 150 and £100 that will be donated in their name and organisation to More Trees. And if you're not familiar with More Trees, they plant a tree for every £1 that is donated. So a fantastic idea, and we really hope that you engage with all the great content and hopefully earn some points that can then translate into a donation. Alongside the several panel discussions that we'll have on the agenda for you to enjoy, there are networking opportunities that can be accessed via the speed networking function throughout the day. So please do use that because, as I'm sure you know and agree, collaborating with colleagues is another great source of education, which leads me to remind you about our PSE platform. You and your teams can access a wealth of resources as part of our on-demand content alongside the digital marketplace. We also really want to hear what you think. Your views matter to us on today's event. So please feel free to share your thoughts and experiences across social media using the hashtag. We have to have a hashtag. It is PSE365. That's hashtag PSE365. We would really love to hear what you think. So let's now move to the focus of today's event. So I'm going to give you a little bit of context here. The latest cybersecurity breaches survey found that 39% of UK businesses have identified a cyber attack, a consistent result with previous surveys. However, during September 2020 and August 2021, 40% of cyber attacks managed by the National Cybersecurity Centre were aimed at the public sector. The survey trend suggests remote collaboration increases the risk of organisations' data not always being shared securely. With the government cybersecurity strategy published early this year, it is clear cybersecurity, ransomware and data protection are at the top of the agenda for the UK government, ensuring that core government functions are resilient to cybersecurity threats by 2030. Despite the government's commitment to ensuring a more secure public sector, many in the sector are in a less mature digital position, and with some authorities estimating ransomware attacks may have cost the UK economy a minimum of £615 million. How does the public sector navigate the challenges of cybersecurity whilst protecting public data? Now, I'm posing this question as I'm sure it's something that you're all thinking about and perhaps has drawn you to this event today. To kick us off, please can we welcome Brindha McDonald, Chief Security Officer at the Government Property Agency. Brindha's experience is extensive and has led teams across many central government departments before taking her current role earlier this year. So I'd just like to welcome our keynote speech and welcome Brindha into the virtual room.
And good morning, everybody. I'm really delighted to be invited to speak with you at today's public sector cybersecurity event. As Geeta has said, my name is Brindha McDonald and I'm the Chief Security Officer at the Government Property Agency. It's really great to be able to speak to you about government security in a time when security threats and the environments in which we operate are so fluid. As we have seen, yes, the flavour of government might change and politicians may come and go, as we've seen in recent weeks. But the very important job of protecting our nation is one for all of us who sit here today. These are serious times. An unthinkable thing happened on the 24th of February 2022. A European neighbour was invaded by Russia, and months later, we are in the throes of conflict on our continent. It's difficult to see how and when this will end, but whilst the Ukrainians fight on valiantly, in the background a different type of war still rages behind the screens of computers. While millions of people have fled from their homes, Ukrainian cyber experts have worked really hard to defend Ukraine's infrastructure from what was predicted to be overwhelming Russian offensive cyber attacks. However, Ukraine's well-prepared and active cyber defence suggests that defenders can gain the upper hand against nation-state offensive cyber. And I just want to pause here. Doesn't that all give us some hope? War is no longer boots on the ground, and the way that we protect our nation, economy, and national interests must adapt and change continuously to meet the ever-changing threat. The government has set out its post-pandemic priorities, including net zero, which is the plan to decarbonise our economy by 2050, to levelling up, which is the programme to spread opportunity more equally across the UK. We will also less. There is no doubt the way that we provide digital services will enable government to operate more efficiently and for the citizen to be able to consume services more effectively and reduce waste in what can sometimes feel like bureaucratic processes. As we recover from the economic impact of the pandemic, together with the inflationary effect of the Ukraine conflict, it's more important than ever that we deliver excellent public services and value to the taxpayer. Digital and data are central to achieving this. We see this in industry and in some public services, which have become more productive after embracing digital transformation, running more efficiently at lower cost while delivering more value to the consumer. Effective flows of data help drive those intelligent digital services, enabling better investment decisions, whilst digital ways of working and highly skilled workforces allow business teams to work smarter and faster. But as you all know, as our cyber risks evolve alongside our growing ambition to digitise our services, so do the threat of malicious actors, from nation states to commodity cyber criminals. While their capabilities, techniques, and service continue to evolve and diversify, the democratization of cyber tools and the monetization of criminal cyber services increasingly lowers the capability and capacity threshold for anyone with the intent to disrupt or undermine the functioning of government. Our national cyber strategy tackles this head-on, setting out how the UK will firmly establish itself as a democratic and responsible cyber power, able to protect and promote its interests as a sovereign nation in a world fundamentally now shaped by technology. Government organisations and the functions and services they deliver are the cornerstone of our society, but it is also their significance that make them an attractive target for an ever-expanding army of adversaries, often with the kind of powerful cyber capabilities which not so long ago would have been the sole preserve of nation-states. Whether in the pursuit of government data for strategic advantage or in seeking the disruption of public services for financial or political gain, the threat faced by government now is very real and very present. Regardless of whether you work in healthcare, finance, pensions, a large department or a small ALB, everyone is a possible and reasonable target. And it's not really a question of if, it's a question of when. So what can we do together to redress the balance? The Government Cyber Coordination Centre, the GCCC, will establish a robust model to coordinate operational cybersecurity efforts across government organisations and to truly enhance our ability to respond collectively. Building on successful private sector models such as the Financial Sector Cyber Collaboration Centre, the GCCC will foster partnerships to rapidly identify, investigate and coordinate the response to incidents alongside very important threat and vulnerability reporting. Key to this will be transforming how cybersecurity data and threat intelligence is used across the community. Ensuring that such data can be rapidly shared, consumed and actioned will dramatically improve the government's ability to defend as one when managing incidents, vulnerabilities and threat at scale. As a joint venture between the Government Security Group, the Central Digital and Data Office and the NCSC, the GCCC will form strong partnerships with government departments and devolved administrations. As you know, commercially provided products and services play an integral part in delivering government's functions and services. As government supply chains become increasingly expansive and interconnected, vulnerabilities in supplier systems and in the products and services they deliver present increasingly attractive opportunities to adversaries seeking to gain access to our networks. Recognising this growing risk, we need to take steps to better understand our dependencies on suppliers and ensure and services are integrated into our systems in a way that takes full account of their impacts on security and resilience. In doing so, the government will become an exemplar in the procurement and deployment of commercial products and services, becoming a stimulus to improve the broader ecosystem of such suppliers across the UK. But as you all know here today, the level of maturity, capability, investment and security understanding across government organisations remains inconsistent, and the size and complexity of our digital estate, including the presence of substantial legacy IT, makes the challenge complicated. The size and diversity of supply chains makes it difficult to manage the risk, with long-term contracts sometimes stifling innovation. Further to this, complex governance structures, insufficient accountability, levers and incentives, as well as underdeveloped mechanisms to effectively share information and capabilities, significantly impacts full visibility of cyber risk, as well as its ability to drive change at the scale and pace required. This is made more challenging by limited resources and the anticipated fiscal challenges we are facing in years to come. In my current role at the Government Property Agency, we have ambitious plans to support levelling up and net zero, while at the same time funding. We do this by operating a thin client model, relying on strategic partners and a broad supply chain to help us achieve our aims, probably in a very similar way to many of your organisations. But while we gain scale and expertise via those supply chains, we can also lose some control. Commercial arrangements and contracts have never been so important from a business and security perspective, and it's critical that the people in your organisation responsible for these services know what they care about the most and how to ensure those protections are built into any commercial arrangement. Do all of your organisations have the required services, resources and skills to manage the risk? Contracts can't simply be signed documents. They must be organic, and we must use them to drive quality assured services delivered by people who understand the security risk, both within the organisation and in our supply chain, working together. And I think this is where the rubber meets the road. People must be at the centre of any solid security architecture, and this must start with education, not just for those working in traditional security functions, but for everyone within the organisation. And we must collectively take the lead on cyber education and be very clear about what we expect from our commercial partners. As threats develop, we must be able to match our capabilities to defend. Cyber criminals know who we are, but we don't know who they are. They are creative and relentless in their pursuit. We have to try and get it right every time, and they don't. We need to acknowledge, for example, that ad hoc training of our people simply won't cut it. Instead, we must strive towards ensuring cyber is really baked into the fabric of any organisation, that leaders set the tone, and that our people are well equipped to spot and report emerging threats. We still have some way to go, though, to win hearts and minds and to put security at the front and centre of organisational priorities, and to sell business benefits rather than focusing solely on the bad thing happening. Much like the work is never done mantra for cyber professionals, so it's the same for organisational education. It must be a continuous effort, engaging and grounded in real-world impact. Today, you will hear from a wide range of experts, for example, on how you can take vital steps to protect data and how you can make cybersecurity an integral part of digital transformation. Our collective aim must be to build a strong foundation of cybersecurity resilience, ensuring that we have the right structures, mechanisms, tools and support in place to manage cybersecurity risks. Recognising that the scale and pace of the threat demands a more comprehensive and joined up response, it should be our collective aim to harness the value of sharing cybersecurity data, expertise and capabilities to present a defensive force disproportionately more powerful than the sum of its parts, which is why events like today's are a key element to building that. We will never get to a position where we have zero threat or zero risk. Sadly, for my cyber colleagues here today, you are in it for the long haul. But by working together, innovating and sharing experiences, we will make it harder for those who try to harm us and for us to be able to defend as one. I hope you all have a fantastic day today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brindha, for that incredibly insightful and interesting presentation. I'm sure it's got all of us thinking, and you might have questions now from that keynote speech that you'll want to draw upon in our sessions throughout the day. So we're going to move on to our first leaders debate now, addressing the topic of data protection, rebuilding public trust. I want to introduce our panel first of all. So joining us this morning, we have James Neville, who is information security expert and lead auditor with SGS, Professor Irka Boyten, head of School of Computer Science and Informatics at De Montfort University, and Mark Ryan, who is Professor in Computer Security for the School of Computer Science and the lead for the Centre of Security and Privacy at the University of Birmingham. So first of all, I'd like to welcome all of you to the virtual room. I'm so happy to have you here. As we mentioned earlier, this is really an opportunity to engage with our panelists too. So if you're not familiar with this platform, there is a ask your question function. I'll keep an eye out for those questions and try and put as many as I can to our panelists. But I thought if it's okay with you, first of all, it'd be great to just have 1 or 2 minutes just to introduce yourself and to tell us about what you do. So, James, perhaps we can start with you.
Yeah, thanks, Geeta. So, as per the introduction, I'm an information security auditor with SGS. SGS is a certification body providing certification against the requirements of ISO IEC 27001 in its 2013 edition currently. So the requirements for information security management systems, and we provide the certification to a number of public sector organizations and MSPs for operating in the public sector, including NHS Resolution, partners for the London Borough Tower Hamlets and the Met Police, and wider globally, so also the UNICC and other organizations. So that's me.
Fantastic. Thank you, James. Over to you, Irka.
Good morning, Irka Boyten. I'm the head of computer science at De Montfort and head of the Cyber Technology Institute there. De Montfort University and the Cyber Technology Institute is one of 7 institutes in the UK that has the National Cybersecurity Accreditation, both on teaching and on research. So we've got a strong large research team in cybersecurity, as well as being involved with education and skills at all levels. So I was very, very pleased to hear Brinda's message about education and the agenda of universities connecting with, for example, local industry in order to do upskilling in the area of cybersecurity is high on our plate. We've done research in many areas. Personally, I've worked on cyber technology, threat information sharing, and how that can be best done. And that's again a topic that's been highlighted in Brinda's talk. So thanks very much for that.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, Mark.
Hey, good morning. Thank you. So my profile is a little bit similar to Irka's in that I lead a group here at University of Birmingham. And again, similar to Irka, our group has accreditation both for teaching and research from NCSC, the National Cybersecurity Organization. And the kind of research that I'm involved in, and that I think relates a little bit to the keynote talk that we just heard, is about mechanisms by which you can kind of securely share data. So in the keynote talk, we heard a little bit about supply chains, and that's a very common thing, that within a supply chain, you want different organizations to share data with each other. But obviously, they have to be concerned about how their data is going to be used. So the research question there is, how can one organization or one individual share data with another one and have restrictions on how that data is used? And you can imagine applications, for example, in medical data. I'm happy for my medical data to be used in aggregate for research purposes in order to improve treatments and so on. But I don't want to be exposed to threats that my data will be abused and used against me in some way. Financial data, supply chain data, manufacturing data, all of those come into that category. And I'm very interested in developing mechanisms to help people share their data more securely.
Excellent. And Mark, that's something definitely that we want to get into with you. Just a reminder again, if you have any questions, do pop them in the Ask Your Question box. And if there's someone specifically you want to direct them to, just put their name in first as well. Data, as we all know, has been at the heart of many public sector organisations' responses to the global pandemic, and with the UK government launching a consultation on reforms to create an ambitious, pro-growth and innovation-friendly data protection regime in a post-Brexit UK. Data, as we know, is going to continue to be an integral part of public services. So, Ilka, I wanted to start with you. What would you say are the most substantive changes that the UK government is proposing in its data protection reform?
I think it's mainly proposing to smoothen things out a little bit in places. Some things that were compulsory in the past, its suggestion is that they become less compulsory. But if you read between the lines, there's still the overall targets should still be achieved. So, for example, data protection impact assessment, something I particularly love, find interesting anyway, will no longer be required in lots of circumstances, but still the processes need to be in place to make sure that this happens. Some of the changes are a little bit more worrying from a privacy perspective, in that the independence of data protection officers within organizations is suggested to be removed, as well as the independence of the Information Commissioner's Office as the regulator has already been removed in 2015 to some extent, and that's going to devolve further. So there is a little bit of a tangling of the responsibility for innovation and growth with the responsibility for it being done responsibly, and that will lead to some interesting tensions if that gets executed as planned. On the whole, there's also a sense of we're cutting red tape, we're removing unnecessary burdens, which for which the proof of the pudding is in the eating. You need the real examples of whether things are unnecessary and whether you can really remove them, because they were still only means to an end of making sure that data is being treated responsibly and safely and securely.
Excellent, thank you. James, just coming over to you, because we mentioned obviously the pandemic. You can't ignore the pandemic. You know, we're still emerging from it, and one of the biggest changes has been remote working. And I wonder, how have you found that organisations have approached remote working cybersecurity risks, and what do we need to be thinking about?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of different things to consider. A lot of organizations continue to work in a hybrid model, and security risks are only increasing. So just in terms of the measures that organizations have adopted to manage those risks, just considering strong cryptography everywhere for any connection into the environment. I know in the education sector, that's a vector of attack that's been leveraged successfully during the pandemic. So multi-factor authentication everywhere, as per the NCSC's guidance, data loss prevention tools and monitoring. So just to combat risks of shadow IT and the use of SaaS applications where people just want to get the job done and continue to get the job done. So we'll use tools that are available freely to do that. But in doing so, we find that data's egressing out of organizations to insecure platforms or secure platforms, but just not managed directly by the organization, so over which the organization has no control. So identifying the use of those applications and having application controls in place is critical. And identifying where data is moving outside of the organization is now essential for most organizations. Also, just turning off plug and play and removable media controls is important too. Restrictions on printing we have to consider, and where people in the organization are required to print, having measures in place to ensure that they can dispose of confidential information securely. So issuing printers where that's still happening, and just stepping up the game in terms of awareness for all users, just where we've seen threat actors increasing the risks of phishing, smishing, vishing, and just malware attacks generally. So keeping a security-aware workforce is critical, and like in our keynote speech, just the culture of security and embedding that in organizations is critical. As well, ransomware continues to be an ever-present threat. So network isolation flows and playbooks for IT teams, putting in place DR arrangements, immutable storage solutions, and off-network backups, and testing all of that. So the NCSC has its exercise in a box playbooks that'll be available to everyone, and I recommend those. And other than that, just training and investing in the tools and the teams that are required to operate all of those controls. So that's the approach to take, and the NCSC's guidance is the most beneficial.
Thank you, James. Lots to think about there. Mark, you mentioned it earlier in your introduction about sort of handling sensitive data. Of course, that's something that public sector organisations often hold. Because this panel is about how we build trust, how do we build trust in systems for allowing researchers, for example, to access medical data?
Yeah, that's a good question. And actually, it relates very well to some of the questions that I'm seeing on the Ask Your Question panel that you mentioned, from Ben Newman-Wright, who asks about data anonymization. And again, this question, how can you do data analysis while protecting privacy? So I want to try to address all of those in one go, in a way. There's quite a lot of modern cryptography that tries to allow this to happen. So you can encrypt data and yet still be able to perform certain kinds of operations on it, but in a restricted way, so that you can answer some questions but not others. So coming to your example, Geeta, of medical data, you could imagine a system where data is encrypted about cancer patients, and yet still some statistical analysis can be done to figure out whether certain treatments work or not. But you're not able to look at the data corresponding to any particular individual. And that would be the sort of restriction you want, because individuals want to protect their privacy, but they don't mind aggregate data being derived from the database. So that's kind of one way to do it. And there are many schemes that give you that sort of mechanism in various flavors. Unfortunately, these mechanisms are often quite sensitive to the specifics of the business case, if you like, exactly what sort of questions you want to be answered and what restrictions you want to be put in place.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Ben Newman-Wright, for that question. I think he does actually ask another question, Mark, which is, what role do you see for synthetic data?
Yes, I saw that question. Well, I think there are many roles for synthetic data. So synthetic data I take to be, if you like, made up data, which is meant to correspond to real data and meant to have the kind of same statistical properties, but not be private because it's not actually about any real people. And I think that there's lots of roles for that. I mean, I think a lot of that is used, for example, in machine learning algorithms, where you want to train a machine learning system. One problem with machine learning systems is often that when they get deployed, you can figure out what the training data was. So if it's training data about real people, that's a problem, because you could allow adversaries to figure out the data about real people. So there, for example, you might use synthetic data. There are risks involved in that, because if your synthetic data does not have the right statistical properties, then you could end up kind of having a machine learning algorithm which has not been trained in the right way. Now, I don't know if that's quite what Ben had in mind, because there are many, many other ways you could use synthetic data. So I would invite Ben to just be a little bit more specific if he wants a more specific answer.
No, thank you, Mark. And I just wonder, Ilke or James, is there anything that you want to add to that question at all?
Yes, please. I mean, when we talk about anonymization, that's just one way of sharing data. And it's in some ways it's an old-fashioned and dangerous way of sharing data, right? The point of sharing data is not really the data itself. The point of the data is what we want to do with it. So sharing anonymized data is sort of a way of doing that, trying to restrict the damage. You give somebody the data, but you make it less dangerous. But you still don't have control over whether they would try to re-identify the data or whether they would share it with other parties that you're not that interested in. So in my view, the model of the future is not to share the data itself, but to share the access to the data. So, for example, some of the most interesting research done in the COVID period was done by Ben Goldacre and his team at the University of Oxford in a system called Open Safely, where they gather large amounts of medical data of people, and researchers in that whole system, researchers have access to the data only via an indirection. They can submit their queries to the system, try them out on synthetic data, on test data, and then they get if that's all looks safe, and if it looks like there's nothing fishy going on in terms of privacy invasion in the queries that they're sending, the queries get executed on the real data and the results fed back to the researchers. And that way the researchers get access to the data in a way that doesn't actually expose the data to any chance of abuse. And there are also models in there which is a much further discussion, where people actually hold the data on their own devices, and mechanisms are in place that all the medical data of all people, for example, is collected, or queries are executed on their collective mobile phone stored medical data, and funny things with blockchains and whatever else there. Lots of new models of sharing access to data don't involve sharing data, and in a sense that must be the future. The richer the data is, the harder it becomes to anonymize.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't. Oh, sorry, Geeta. I wouldn't add anything to that. So, just on a different tack, in terms of anonymization or pseudonymization, I think just we have to be careful around integrity when we're running those scripts, so that we're not affecting production data, as it were, or personal data as we're running those scripts to anonymize or pseudonymize or create synthetic data. And just part of Mark's point, really that we're not able to reverse engineer our pseudonymized data or anonymized data from some of those data points to get back to a living individual. And logs also generated in performing those operations. We have to be careful that we're also not capturing personal identifiable information there too as we're running those scripts. So that's all I wanted to add. Urka and Mark pretty much covered that topic holistically and quite comprehensively.
Excellent. Well, Ben, I think you've got there a 360 answer. And I wanted to stay with you, James, actually, to move on a little bit to privacy regulations.
Sure.
Because are there any more changes to privacy regulations coming? And what should we all be considering in this space?
Yeah, well, I mean, we touched on this with the DCMS's response to the consultation on, data and new direction, the UK's national data strategy that was launched last year. So, Urka pretty much covered a lot of the considerations there and what's changing or potentially changing with the submission of the data privacy bill and the changes to the role of the data protection officers in organizations and all the rest of it. I wouldn't really add too much more to that, just to say that there was a big sigh of relief, I think, from organizations across the UK in reading the proposals. Not too much change. Obviously, a lot of organizations are conscious of the drift between the EU GDPR and the UK GDPR and the changes that are potentially coming to the Privacy and Electronic Communications regulations and the Data Protection Act. And too much drift, obviously, may affect the adequacy decision when we reach the sunset clause on the adequacy decision that we achieved in 2024, and it's really that further divergence from the EU GDPR that we need to be concerned about, and what that final act will look like. But I wouldn't add too much to what Erka mentioned. Just in terms of the soft opt-out is obviously now extended to non-commercial organisations, so there's more scope potentially coming as proposed in the response to the consultation, and there's this added step between the regulator and the subject, if you like. So complaints are now to be directed to the controller rather than to the regulator. So we've got this arm's length step now potentially, and also the threshold for refusing a DSAR, the wording's changing there. So for a subject to request access to their data, if it's deemed vexatious by an organization, that's the term, then the organization could potentially refuse it on those grounds. So like I say, a sigh of relief in terms of the changes, but we wait with bated breath to see what actually materializes.
Thank you, James. And just to note, we've got about 5 minutes left on this panel discussion. So if you do have a burning question, please do pop it in now, and I'll try and put it to our panel. Mark, a question for you. How can we develop better systems for avoiding random proliferation of private data across lots of companies and websites?
Yeah, thank you. That's a nice question. I think there's many ways in which our data gets kind of randomly proliferated around websites. I mean, for example, let me just consider the situation of KYC, know your customer. So whenever you do any kind of financial transaction, opening a bank account, buying or selling a house, trading cryptocurrency, or any of these things, you have to upload a copy of your passport or your driving license or something. And I always do that with a heavy heart, because I'm uploading it to an organization. I don't know who they are. I don't know what kind of controls they have in place for protecting this treasure trove of passports that they are acquiring from all their customers. There could be all kinds of insider attacks there. They may have some employees who have not been there that long, or who maybe joined specifically for the purpose of accessing this kind of data. And I think it's a very unsatisfactory state of affairs, where we have to sort of hand over this data and have no idea about how it's going to be used. So one of the things that I'm interested in from a research perspective is how you could do that in a better way, how you could prove who you are without actually enabling the person who receives that proof from kind of masquerading as you. Because if you give me your passport or a copy of it, then that enables me to masquerade as you. I would like in some way to prove to you who I am without giving you that ability to then go and pretend to be me. Now, there's many, many ways to do that. And I think from a kind of research point of view, it's actually not that difficult to figure out, we could do it this or that way. The problem is getting these ways adopted, because, passports are a kind of traditional document that everybody knows very well and everyone understands how they work. And therefore, it's the kind of easy go-to if you are a bank and you're kind of doing the KYC on your customers. Yeah, we'll just get them to upload their passports. So it's actually, difficult to persuade people to go for some more satisfactory method, because just the kind of legacy. I think this is something that government could help with. Government could try to provide better mechanisms. It's not that easy. We did have UK Gov Verify. I don't know if anybody remembers that, but it's a system that government introduced for this kind of purpose, and I think it's a little bit dead now because people didn't take it up. So that's some of the challenges that I see. But since we're ending soon, let me hand over to somebody else.
No, thank you so much, Mark. That was such a great answer. And we only have a minute and a half. I've got one question, which I guessing is not enough time, but I'll just throw it, and anyone who wants to pick it up, and we'll end it there. And this is a question from John. What's the panel's views on the government's proposed digital ID scheme? Don't know who wants to take that.
Oh, I'll give it a go. I think it's essential in the sense of the sort of things that Mark was talking about, avoiding having to prove who you are an awful lot of times, and the debris that arises as a consequence of that. On the other hand, the UK is a funny country because most European countries have a digital ID scheme of some kind, but in most European countries, the citizens trust the government more than they do in the UK. And I think when we're talking about rebuilding trust, you've hit the nail on the head for the keys to the answer to this particular question.
Thank you so much. Yeah, sorry, James. We've got a few seconds left.
I just think tokenization of the something that you are versus something that you have or know is a consideration there. So as long as it doesn't, as long as I can change whatever that token is, I'm happy with that. I'm a bit of a privacy nut, so I share Erka's and Mark's concerns in that space.
Thank you. And I have to say, you should all be on the television because you did exceptionally well getting that all in such a short space of time. So we have come to the end of our first panel discussion. I'd like to say a huge thank you to James Neville, Professor Erka Boyton, and also to Mark Ryan, Professor Mark Ryan, for joining us this morning for what I'm sure is going to get a lot of people thinking throughout the day. We are going to have a break now, so thank you so much for being a part of this conversation, and for those asking questions, hoping we'll get lots more as well as the day goes ahead. We'll take a break now, and if you do have a chance, do engage with the speed networking opportunity. It might be a great chance to talk about some of the things that have been raised so far this morning. And our next session is at 11:40. So we'll see you then. Thank you.